Good evening, everyone. My name's John Heubusch. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, and I just want to welcome every one of you for joining us this evening. In honor of our men and women around the world in uniform who protect our freedoms every day, if you would please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. I'd like to get this panel on the first 100 days of the Trump presidency started with a comment about adages. Now, all of you here are familiar with adages. They're proverbs that express a general truth. I say a general truth because, as we all know, not all adages are true. For example, contrary to popular opinion, the customer is not always right. The grass is not always greener. What doesn't kill you doesn't always make you stronger. And finally, there's the old saying, reminding us that we should never meet our heroes. They say this because when you do meet your hero, that's when you often discover just how ordinary or disappointing they might turn out to be. This adage is just outright false, and I have the evidence right behind me to prove it. All three gentlemen, and gentlemen they are, as not a one of them has complained yet about staring at my backside. They are true heroes of mine. I have had the chance in my role at the Reagan Foundation, whether through interviews or introductions, to get to know each one of these men, even if only in small ways. And I can say without hesitation that all three are still my heroes. Like you, I have listened to each with real enjoyment for many years. Now, while our friend Ben Shapiro is sadly no longer in the KRLA lineup, he is the youngest public commentator to do everything in life. I exaggerate, but maybe not everything. He entered UCLA at the age of 16. Graduated cum laude from Harvard Law quicker than one can say graduated cum laude from Harvard Law. And at 17, was the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in the United States. His books, the endless list of media outlets, conservative or otherwise, that have printed his works and his appearances on countless TV and radio shows, all stem from the fact that he is one of the brightest conservative minds on the political playing field, bar none. Now, to his right, physically, not politically, is Hugh Hewitt, a longtime friend of the Reagan Foundation and Library. Hugh, too, is a Harvard alum, although his law degree was earned from the University of Michigan. A constitutional law professor for over 20 years, Hugh is a conservative intellectual of the first order. Hugh told me earlier backstage that he, like Ronald Reagan during debates, is too much of a gentleman to make age an issue on this panel. He said that he is not going to, quote, exploit for political purposes Ben Shapiro's youth and inexperience. By that I mean, as I noted, Ben has accomplished so much while so young. Hugh was serving President Reagan as assistant counsel in the White House and as special assistant to 2 attorneys general in the Reagan administration before, well, it says here, before Ben was born. Finally, last but most certainly not least, we have on stage the one, the only sage from South Central. Not to be outdone in the law school department, Larry is also a graduate of the University of Michigan School of Law. Starting in 1994 with the Larry Elder Show, Larry hosted the longest-running, top-rated daily afternoon drive time radio show in Los Angeles. In a description of one of his several books, Larry's style is summed up well. Quote, Larry skewers the crippling myths that dominate the public agenda. Larry punctures all pretension, trashes accepted wisdom, and puts everyone on notice that the status quo must be shaken up. Close quote. I don't know who wrote that review. For all I know, it might have been Larry himself. But being a daily listener of Larry's, making me an El Dorado, I have to say I wholeheartedly agree. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you, if you would, to please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library an outstanding lineup put together by our good friends at KRLA AM870, Misters Ben Shapiro, Hugh Hewitt, and Larry Elder.
Thank you, John. It's always fun to be back at President Reagan's house that John has overseen with such great care. John is a very humble man as well, and on your way out, make sure you pick up his new novel about the Shroud of Turin, because you will then be riveted for the next few days with an amazing read, and it's on the way out as you go there. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, because while you've come to hear us tonight, we would not be here without the good work of Mike Lindahl and MyPillow.com. And I would love you to try a MyPillow, because I honestly do sleep on it every single night. I want to thank Sonny Sardo. Where are you, Sonny? Would you stand up? There he is. He's right in front of me. Sonny Sardo. Sonny has been, I've been on KRLA since 2000, and Sonny has been there longer than me. He's been there for 26 years. And I was telling him tonight, quite sincerely, he has the most mellifluous and wonderfully winsome commercials where he makes you want him to come to your house even if there's nothing that needs fixing or upholstering. You just want him to come by for a cup of coffee. And Sonny's Interior, thank you, Sonny, for doing that. LAX Firing Range and LAX Ammo, where are you? You're Larry's favorite people. Thank you for being here. And Frosh Travel, where's Frosh? And I want to thank you especially, April. RP is going to be, RP, not April, RP is going to be where afterwards to talk about, right over here, to talk about a Larry Elder cruise, which I'm kind of upset that I'm not going on. It's on Regent Seven Seas, and I love Regent, and Larry's going to love Regent, and I should be on that cruise, not you, Larry. All that having been said, it's a good thing we're doing this tonight. 100 days is Saturday, but tomorrow night is the march of the Browns to the NFL championship. I'm wearing my Cleveland Browns tie. And I want everyone viewing at home to note that we will be drafting tomorrow night at this time the future of the Super Bowl champion. I also want everyone at home to know that Ben, though he is not on AM870 anymore, does have an amazing podcast with, how many downloads a day?
About 500,000.
500,000 downloads a day. Now, I do worry that there are that many people with nothing else to do besides listen to Ben. But I am glad that but you should subscribe. And so I want to urge you to subscribe to keep Ben giving him the lift of the driving dream that is turning, I think, young minds especially around, but also download it. And I'm going to start with Ben. Ben was, to use a word, ambivalent about President Trump. And then go to Larry for your assessment. Let's get right to it. The first 100 days are over on Saturday. Your assessment.
I'm going to say need more information, and I know that's a cop-out, but that is what it is. Yeah. I do a grade for President Trump every week. I've been grading him weekly on my site, The Daily Wire, and I grade him in 3 categories because it's so hard to break him down because he doesn't have a thoroughgoing ideology or philosophy, so you sort of get some policy here and some policy there, some things said here, some things said there. So I break him down usually in terms of policy rhetoric and then what I call the in-between sort of rhetoric that impacts policy. On policy, I think 70 to 80% of what he's done is fantastic. I think his appointments have been great. He, not only bucked my expectations in the election, he bucked my expectations, obviously, about Judge Gorsuch. So kudos to him, and kudos.
We argued about that.
We did argue
town
about
hall.
that. We did argue.
You
about that.
doubted
And
me.
I did doubt you, and I was wrong to doubt you. So that's,
Stop right now. We can go home.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Actually, you doubted both of us.
I did doubt both of you. To be fair, I doubted Mitch McConnell more than I doubted either of you. And I will say that I think that Senator McConnell deserves an enormous amount of credit for how he's handled this, at least as much as President Trump, because I think that any Republican in that position should have appointed somebody good, but McConnell did what he had to do, and that I was not expecting from Senator McConnell. But in any case, if you look at the promises that Trump made for his first 100 days, everything he said he was going to do as far as executive action, like 80% of it he's done. When it comes to legislation, nothing. There has not been really any major legislation from this administration. There's been Congressional Review Act striking down of particular regulations. But as far as policy, my view is that when he lets his people do what they're supposed to do, everything goes great. When he sticks his thumb in the middle of it, it goes sideways. When it comes to his rhetoric, he had what I thought was one of the great speeches in the history of the chamber at Congress when he gave his joint session to Congress speech. I thought it was a great speech. And then he has his Twitter feed. So it's all over the place. And when it comes to policy, rhetoric that impacts policy, in 1 week you will get him saying a lot of the right things about taxes today, and then you'll have him saying he's going to revoke NATO by Friday. And you don't really know where he's. So the analogy that I have used, the metaphor that I've used for President Trump, is that President Trump has a lot of data points, and I can't tell yet whether when we pull out from these data points it's going to be a Seurat painting, and it's all organized and there's something there, or whether when we pull out from these data points, it's going to be my baby's vomit. I just don't know yet. So it's.
There are Steelers fans in the audience who won't know what a Seurat painting is.
Yeah, for those who haven't watched Sunday in the Park with George, it's like pointillistic painting, basically. You pull out from the painting, and it looks like it's designed. It looks like it's all put in place. I know a lot of the members of the administration. The reports of chaos inside the administration are exaggerated somewhat, but certainly not false. And so. I think putting an overly optimistic gloss on the administration is false. I think the people who are saying this is the worst administration ever, it's clearly going to be a disaster, are also full of it.
Larry Elder.
Wow. Whenever I follow Ben, I feel like Homer Simpson after Bart asked him to help him with his geometry. Hugh, I guess I look at it very differently. I'm reminded of this joke that I was told the other day. This old Marine goes to the White House guard post and asks to speak to President Barack Obama. And the guard informs this World War II old guy that President Obama no longer lives there. Next day, Marine shows up, same guard, asks him to speak to President Barack Obama. The guard informs Marine that President Obama no longer lives there. Third day comes up, and the guard starts feeling sorry for this man. Feels he must have dementia. Sir, you've come here 2 days now, and I've told you twice that President Obama no longer lives here. And the Marine says, I know. I just like hearing you say it. That's how I feel. That's how I feel. Donald Trump's biggest achievement in his first 100 days is he has stopped the left-wing agenda. If Hillary were in office, we'd be talking about another Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. We'd be talking about more regulations to fight climate change. Obama dropped $100 billion every year he was in office on the backs of job creators in new regulations. We would be talking about raising taxes on rich people because we know rich people don't pay enough in taxes. We certainly would not be having a conversation about building some sort of barrier or wall on the border. We'd be talking about comprehensive immigration reform. So when you look at what Donald Trump has done or hasn't done, you have to compare it to what would have happened had Hillary won the election. And by that standard, it has been a smashing success for the first 100 days. And you already see it in the stock market. You see it in consumer index, small business. I haven't seen people this optimistic in 10 years, and by some polls, not in 40 years. Because even though Obamacare hasn't been repealed and replaced, even though the tax cuts have not been implemented, business people know that whatever happens, it won't be as onerous and as expensive as it would have been had Hillary won the election. So whatever happens, it's going to be better than what they experienced in the last 8 years. And that's given people a lot of confidence to invest in the future.
I'm perhaps the most complimentary of the three. The last time I was at the Reagan Library was actually to participate in the Salem Media Group CNN debate in the big room with the airplane, 40 feet above the ground, worried about a California earthquake at any time. And the story behind that story was I was told to bring an extra shirt in case I spilled on it, to bring an extra tie, but no one told me that if your zipper breaks, you're flat out of luck. And so in every shot, I've got my papers strategically positioned. But we got through it, but I remember quite well, it was two debates. There was a first debate and a second debate. And the second debate, President Trump was then candidate Trump, and he was standing in the middle next to Jeb Bush. And if you had asked me then what the odds were that Mr. Trump would become President Trump, I would have said there are no odds. You can't get those odds. They don't exist. And so I believe to a certain extent when we talk about President Trump, everyone in the media, if we were the NFL, we'd still be in a concussion protocol. And I may have been the only person at 30 Rock on the night of the election on NBC to have voted for Donald Trump. I am what I call a reluctant Trump voter. 3 weeks before the election, I asked him to step aside after the Access Hollywood video came out. He didn't, and so with this choice of Hillary and Donald, I voted for the president. And I'm glad he didn't step out because there are only two paths that we could have been on, the one that Hillary won that Larry alluded to and the one where Donald won and where we are. And that includes, I don't consider the 13 Congressional Reform Acts to be minor. I think they're hugely significant because of the way that they work. Little understood, but there's a lot of scholarship going into them. Not only do they repeal the regulation that they are intended to repeal, but they bar the door to the agency to return to that area absent specific congressional authorization, more or on the way. I look at the Gorsuch nomination as so significant. I teach con law, I've been teaching it forever, and Ben and Larry and I are all lawyers. It's a 30-year decision, and every 5-4 decision that comes down will be significant, but so will his opinions. I had dinner the other night with one of the final seven people interviewed, and with Mr. Bannon, Mr. Priebus, Mr. McGahn, and one other person, not the president, 7 finalists. And at the end, they asked each of the finalists, if not you, who? And this finalist said, Neil Gorsuch. He's the finest appellate judge in America. And so it was a choice that will resound through the era that will define, long after I've gone to my reward and Ben is in my position of being the old guy, he'll be talking about Judge Gorsuch if he is blessed with a long life and what he's doing, and it will be Donald Trump. So that is so huge. On top of that, I view the visits of Prime Minister May and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the visits of President Sisi and King Abdullah, the Secretary General Stoltenberg's visit, all to have been such a sea change from the passivity of Barack Obama and the anti-Americanism of President Obama. And I won't say anti-Americanism, I mean anti-American leadership. He was very much in a position of being against American leadership in the world, though he is phrased about it. His whole foreign policy, leading from behind, red line, JVs, or places, Libya, Aleppo, Crimea, or people that he appeared with and he held up, including the mullahs of Tehran. The sea change that occurred is so significant that we're having trouble getting our arms around it because of the personality of Donald Trump. I don't think that personality is going to change, and I think I may have vastly underestimated how good it is to have someone as hostile as he is to the mainstream media. And so that is my... Before I go to the second round of questions, I'm very aware of the problems. He ought not to have called a federal judge a so-called federal judge. It is never appropriate. It is never prudent to do that. He ought not to have called his critics enemies of the state. They are not. That's a loaded term. It's a term that dates back to a very dark time in communism, and to be an enemy of the state in Joseph Stalin's Russia was to be liquidated. And he ought not to have moved at the pace he has moved on the 120 other judicial vacancies which exist, which is not at all. He's nominated one judge since January 20th, one judge other than Neil Gorsuch. He has successfully confirmed 27 people, nominated 34 others, and there are 540 advise and consent positions. So I am deeply concerned that if we don't pick up the pace, all the good work of James Madison, H.R. Madison, all the good work of Scott Pruitt and Tom Price will be lost because the permanent state will not move. Second question, is it good, bad, or indifferent that the President of the United States is at war with the media? Ben.
So I'm always in favor of being at war with the media, but what you replace the media with has to be truth. And this is one area where I've been, troubled. Listen, no one smacks the media on a regular basis on their own programs harder than I do. So I am very much, I'm the guy who put Piers Morgan in a coma. So I like doing this for a living. But the idea but here's where I have a problem. There is a pattern that seems to be playing out where Trump says the media is fake news. And then immediately, it turns out that what he is saying in replacement of the fake news is also not fully true. And then the left reacts by saying, well, that's not true. And not only is that not true, everything in that realm is not true. And then the right says, well, some of that's true. And then we get into this battle of grays where if he just spoke the truth, he'd be fine. Right? A perfect example of this is the wiretapping allegation on Twitter, which has now eaten up 3 months of time that he could have been using, and energy that he could have been using to actually promulgate good legislation, as opposed to fighting on Twitter with various members of the media and Democrats about an accusation that on its face is not true. What he should have said, if he had the evidence, was that the Obama administration was unmasking, exactly as is now claimed, that they were unmasking people in intelligence reports who were captured in conversation with people who were being captured by the NSA, but they were overseas and they were targets and they were captured inadvertently or whatever it is. But at least be exact. He's the president of the United States. He can pick up the damn phone. And it's very frustrating to me to watch people defend things that are not true just because Donald Trump says them. And I don't think that that's good for the country. I think it's good for the country that we no longer trust the media. I don't think it's good for the country that we can't trust anybody. And that's sort of my basic take on that. And if that sounds hypercritical, it really isn't, because I think that we all ought to be held to the same standard with regard to what is true and what is not, regardless of whether there's an R after our name or whether there is a D after our name. And this goes to the broader questions that I have about President Trump are actually not policy-driven questions, because presidents make policies. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them I'll agree with, some of them I won't. The two things that I was concerned about that are still on the table with regard to President Trump before the election, and I don't think either of them has been fully debunked. The first one is, I always assumed, by the way, that he was going to be better than Hillary Clinton, because a dead horse would be better than Hillary Clinton in that position. So using Hillary Clinton as your standard of, at least he's not Hillary Clinton, I agree, at least he's not Hillary Clinton. So is what I did in the toilet, so what? But the problem that I have is twofold. One is that he was going to promulgate policy and ideas that are not conservative, and conservatives would buy into them just because a top Republican was doing them. And you saw there's a Pew poll yesterday that shows that a majority of Americans, 55% of Americans, now want bigger government with more services. And the big shift there is not among Democrats. That big shift is happening among Republicans, because President Trump is not a small government president. He has regulators who are small government people, but he himself has said he doesn't want to cut the entitlement state. He himself has talked about expanding spending in a variety of areas, including infrastructure. So that was problem number one that I had. And problem number two was he actually has to be good at this. And by this, I mean politics. Let's not kid ourselves that this was a resounding victory for President Trump. When he says he won this a resounding electoral victory, that's true except for all of the other electoral victories that have ever taken place. This is actually a relatively close election in which he lost the popular vote by 3 million. The reason I point this out is not to say he's not illegitimate, or is not to say that he's illegitimate. Of course he's legitimate. He's the president of the United States. He won fair and square, and it wasn't Russian hacking. It was that Hillary Clinton was a crappy candidate, and he ran a better campaign than she did. All of that is true. And I know I'm making myself unpopular, but tough. The problem that I have is that if he continues to distract himself with stupidities, if he continues to treat the media like he's a third-grade boy and they're a third-grade girl, and he's going to pull their pigtails to get their attention, but he kind of likes them, but he kind of doesn't. I hate the New York Times, they're failing, but I'll give a scoop to them the next day. Right? If he continues to do that routine, and he maintains a 35 to 40% approval rating going into 2018, incumbent parties lose seats in the House in midterm elections. If they lose a lot of seats in the House and they lose the House in 2018, and then he doesn't get major things done between now and 2018, the window is closing. It's funny to say that after 100 days, but he needs to get something done before the 2018 elections take place. Because if Democrats were to win the House in 2018, they will immediately move to impeach him. Yes. Because they hate him. They will immediately move to impeach him. His approval rating is already low, and the idea that he's a sure thing for re-election just is not the case, given how this last election went, and he was running against, remember, the weakest candidate in the history of the United States. So I don't want to trade one election for President Elizabeth Warren and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That's not so do a good job. I'm begging President Trump to please stop being distracted. Please focus in on the things that matter. You want to attack the media? Please attack them on the substance instead of attacking them on things that don't matter and that you read a chyron on Fox News and now you're tweeting about it and we have 3 months of conversation about it in an attempt to cover it up.
Larry, the media and the president.
Your question was, is it a good thing that President Trump is at war with the media? Well, the media has been at war with Republicans for years. It's about time that we've figured it out and declared war back. So I'm delighted. What we found out through WikiLeaks is that not only are the media left-wing, which we already knew, but they are actively colluding with the DNC to get Republicans defeated and get Democrats elected. John Harwood was a debate moderator, for crying out loud. He works for the New York Times as a reporter. He's also an anchor for CNBC. He was a debate moderator. And after the debate, he writes a letter to John Podesta, Hillary's campaign chair, bragging about the question that he asked Donald Trump, that he thought had knocked Donald Trump off his heels, and offering free advice to how to deal with this phenomenon known as Ben Carson. This is a guy who was at the debate. We also found out that a New York Times reporter was doing an extensive article on Hillary and gave her the permission to excise any quote she didn't like. She had said something apparently about Sarah Palin and didn't like it and took it out of the column. I mean, who has the power to take things they don't like out of a column that somebody's writing about you? Washington Post was writing a column about John Podesta, and found out that there was some sort of conflict of interest regarding money, and told him, according to these emails that were published by WikiLeaks, don't worry about it, we'll bury the story, it won't hurt you. Staffers from Jake Tapper and staffers from Wolf Blitzer contacted the DNC and said, look, we're about ready to interview some Republican candidates. Do you have any questions we can ask them? Dana Milbank is a columnist with the Washington Post. He wrote a piece called The 10 Most Outrageous Things Donald Trump Ever Said, told the DNC he was about ready to write such a column, asked them to give him some ideas. They gave him 10, he used 8 of them. This is what we're dealing with. Jonathan Karl is a reporter for ABC News. And during the 2012 campaign, he reported that an auto mechanic making $75,000 a year is paying a higher effective federal income tax rate than Donald Trump. I had Jonathan Karl on my show after that for a different reason, otherwise he probably wouldn't have come on. And I said, Jonathan, if you compare apples to apples and you look at a married man who has a home, has children, and takes the standard deductions, just as Mitt Romney is a married man with a home and children, the effective tax rate of the auto mechanic is substantially lower than Donald Trump's. You were wrong. And you went out there and you did a stand-up and you told this to the American people. You were wrong and you should apologize. He said, I'll look at it and I'll get back to you. He never did. So this is what we're dealing with. Harry Reid stands on the floor of the Senate and says the word on the street is that Mitt Romney hasn't paid any taxes at all. And Harry Reid is still treated like a human being. Can you imagine if somebody did that to Obama and went on the floor of the Senate and just said Obama hasn't paid taxes? The guy would have to move to Bangladesh.
Well, it'd be fair if he claimed that he were born in Kenya that he'd be president today.
Yeah. So the media is the enemy. These are people out to get Republicans, out to undermine Republicans. These are people who believe in climate change, who believe in raising taxes, who believe in a jacked up minimum wage, who think that racism and sexism and homophobia are major problems in America when in fact they aren't. These are enemies, and Donald Trump has recognized that and put them on notice.
These are opponents, and this is where I Park Company, and I'll throw this as a subject number 3. I think the country is under a lot of stress, and it's great for our business, by the way. Whatever is bad for the country is great for talk radio and for television, but I honestly don't think we can live at this level of stress for 4 years. And we've been living at this level of stress since the Reagan Library debate in this place in August of 2015. And this level of stress has meant that families that used to get together beyond Thanksgiving and Christmas don't, that old friends have defriended people. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. I'm a child of the Eisenhower presidency. I'm born in 1956. That makes me 61 for all of you people out there. And The Wonder Years was a television series in which politics did not intrude. And you can actually watch the whole thing. Fred Savage, not a word about politics in the 60s. There isn't a child of the age 10 now who is not politicized. And I think this is terrible. And I wonder if you two will comment on that, because there's a long-term consequence to politicization of everything every day.
I totally agree with that. I think that first of all, I will say that this particular war was started by the left. I mean, the left has used
Agreed.
the culture as a club to beat the living hell out of Republicans for years. I mean, Larry's quoted my book, and thank you for that, on television. I've interviewed all the creators of these television shows. They were using their television shows as vehicles for their politics for years. So that's not, this was not started by the right, but there's no question that it's reached fever pitch now to the point where we're seeing pitched battles in the streets of Berkeley. And that's, a very scary thing.
And on the day of the inauguration.
Right, and on the day of the inauguration, and and it's not just with regard to the supposedly too controversial to be had speakers like Ann Coulter. We're talking about people like Charles Murray and Jason Riley who are being banned from.
Can you explain who these guys are?
I mean, Charles Murray is a public intellectual who wrote the book The Bell Curve, which was wrongly labeled racist because if you read the book, he has an entire section where he discusses how he's not saying that IQ differentials are entirely genetic. And then he wrote a book about white people called Coming Apart and differences in culture among white people. And then he was basically rioted out of Middlebury College, and a professor who was escorting him was on the left. Got a concussion from it. I mean, I've been at the center of this. I spoke at Cal State LA, and there was basically a riot there. I'd be rushed out by motorcycle cops. So, I mean, I've seen this at multiple campuses.
And Jason Riley.
Jason Riley is
African-American.
he's a black public intellectual.
Heather McDonald.
Heather McDonald, who writes about why cops are necessary, basically.
Yeah.
And she's run off campus.
Yeah, and she's called a white supremacist.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
Rabbi Daniel Lapin spoke last night in Canada, and he was forced to shut his lecture and lecture in another room. He's like an Orthodox rabbi, for goodness sake. I mean, it's really, it has reached a fever
So
pitch.
what happens if this continues, and what should the president, we're talking about his 100 days,
Well,
what ought he to do about it, if anything?
So I think that the president, I think in some ways he has tried, and in some ways he hasn't. And I think that, because I say that I think most of the blame lies with the left, I understand the reactionary impulse to say, okay, let's just troll the hell out of these people. I think that Obama trolled the right incessantly for 8 years, saying inane and insane things and lying to us and polarizing Americans by race, class, and sexual orientation and sex. And he did that for political purposes.
You have to expand on that, because I agree with you. I think it's profound. And I want people at home especially slow down and explain when you say President Obama trolled the country for 8 years for the left purposes. Explain what you mean.
So Barack Obama came into office, and the assumption by most Americans, including people who didn't vote for him, is that he was going to be the great unifier. He was going to come into office, and he in his very person embodied the great unification that could occur in the United States. We could solve the greatest issue that's plagued the country, race, for 200 years. He would come in, and he would put us beyond red states and blue states and beyond black and white, and we'd finally all just be Americans. And this was just a signifier. This is why people like Laura Ingraham, who really couldn't stand Obama, was happy to the extent that when Obama was elected, she said, I think that it's a good sign for the country we can elect a black person. I never thought that because I thought he's unqualified. Why is he president? But I understand the sentiment, and that was the sentiment, I think, of most Americans. Obama took that, and instead of actually providing a unifying vision for the country, he proceeded to break Americans down into black and white and Latino, and he proceeded to create an agenda for each and every one of those groups. He pit gay people against straight people and said the straight people are out to get you. Religious people are out to get you, gay people, and that's why you need me. Black people, the cops are out to get you, and that's why you need me and Eric Holder to use the DOJ to cram things down on local police departments. And by doing that, he built a coalition in 2012 that the Democrats proclaimed was going to be the new winning coalition. It was the growing demographic coalition. It was going to be young white people, and it was going to be all the minorities, and they were all going to vote for Obama, and that was the new coalition.
And PhDs.
And PhDs, right? And Hillary thought she could duplicate that. This is really why she lost. Hillary thought she could duplicate that coalition, and what she really needed to do was reach out to the same voters that Trump ended up reaching out to in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio. And she didn't do that because she thought she could duplicate his minority turnout and just same coalition, we'll do it again, no problem. But that coalition rests on tribal appeal. And that's what Obama did. And then he would troll us with things like, okay, now I'm going to talk about how Trayvon Martin could be my son. I won't talk about the actual situation regarding Trayvon Martin. I'll say Trayvon Martin could be my son, right? Or when it came to Ferguson, where an innocent police officer was slandered as a murderer, who shot somebody in the back against all evidence. And Obama would get on TV and say, well, people don't just make things up. People did make things up, okay? That's why we were even having an issue and a riot in Ferguson. He trolled us to the point where we were like, okay, who's going to punch these people the hardest? It's Trump. Trump's going to punch these people the hardest. Look how he punches. And so there were a lot of people who backed Trump because of this notion that he fights. Well, that's fine. It's good that he fights. But now we actually, I wrote a column today talking about, are we living in Donald Trump's America, or are we really just living in the reverse iteration of Obama's America to the extent that it feels like we're still polarized along these group lines? And what can we do to get beyond that? And I think the only thing that is going to unify people in the end is just speaking plain and simple truth as opposed to trolling. I think that what Trump did in his State of the Union address, and it was widely celebrated even by people on the left, was he said, here is my vision for America, And here is why I think it's good for all Americans. It's good for black Americans because crime going down is good for black Americans. It's good for poor Americans because a thriving economy is good for poor Americans. It was the only time I'd heard him since he was elected really provide this sort of unifying vision. And I think I celebrated it. I think everybody celebrated it. People said, oh, this is the night he becomes president. And then he immediately reverts. This is why his Twitter feed is actually a problem. On Twitter, he thinks he's getting around the media, but one of the ways he does that is by saying deliberately polarizing things that appeal to a particular base. Everybody in this room loves his Twitter feed, but I promise you that all it's doing is pissing off the other side. And I understand the value in pissing off the other side when it's worthwhile. But there is a difference between being anti-left and being conservative. And just ticking off the other side is not enough. I can tick them off all day. You can too. But the fact is, the hard left are the dumbest people in the world. It's the easiest thing in the world to melt a snowflake. But it is imperative that the cause is not melting the snowflakes. The cause is speaking the truth, and if that melts the snowflakes, good. But it's speaking the truth, and that's why I think that it would be good for Trump to lay off some of the more inflammatory language that he enjoys so much when it's unnecessary. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. I think it would be good for him to provide a unifying vision of the country that doesn't that doesn't target enemies as much. He speaks in terms of enemies as opposed to opponents, as you say, Hugh. And I think that would be a good thing from him. I do still think that it's not on Trump. I still think that it's on the left to come back to the table because the left hates Trump so much. And they hate us so much. And they think we're bad people. Those of us who voted for Trump and those of us who didn't vote for Trump. We're all evil. The left needs to get over that. But the way to get the left over that is by modeling a certain level of behavior. I don't think that we have to fight with every nasty tool the left has used in order to win. If I thought that,
the way to get over that is with a Mike Pence approach to politics.
I think I think Pence is good at this.
And I want to ask Larry specifically about race and whether or not you agree with Ben's assessment of President Obama's tenure and where you've been covering race from South Central for 25 years and now nationally and in between nationally. Where are we in what I thought was a closed conversation in 2009, dead and buried, so that even affirmative action would be over and we would not be talking about a polarized racial America in 2017. Yeah. I really believe that.
Yeah, let alone talking about reparations as we're talking about now.
And every police violence turning into another potential flashpoint riot situation. So where do we go from here? And what do you want Trump to do?
Well, I voted against Obama twice. I wrote a column about why I was voting against him. And, you know, I'm old school. I subscribe to the LA Times and New York Times. The physical paper still gets thrown to the house. The last guy on my block that still get the papers thrown. And the day after the election, after Obama got elected, there was color stories, photographs of black parents hugging their kids on the front page of the New York Times. Same thing, LA Times, all saying, for the first time, I can now look at my child and honestly say, you can be anything you want to be in America. And I said, wow, what would they have done if Obama had lost? What have you been telling your kids all these years? My mother told me when I was 7 years old I could be president if I wanted to, and I believed it. Now, I want to say this, though. When we talk about race relations, there are really two tiers. When people say race relations have gotten worse, what they really mean is that black people and their attitude towards white people and white people and their attitude towards black people has gotten worse. What they're not saying is that race relations have gotten worse, because they haven't. In California, the best way to determine whether or not people are getting along is intermarriage. Finest way. Anthropologists will tell you that. And intermarriage is booming in this country. It's never been this high, especially in California. About 1 in 5 marriages is between different races, different ethnicities. In the country, it's 1 in 10 marriages, all-time high. People are no longer caring when they see somebody who's an interracial couple. There was a time when people had difficulty getting a house, getting a job, getting all sorts of things. Nobody cares anymore. So when you ask me about race relations, I think we're getting along just fine in this country. What we're not having is a conversation, an honest conversation, where when a black person talks about, I've been harassed by the police, I believe that the police are engaging in racial profiling, it is a flat-out lie. The stats do not bear it out. And when people aren't honest in saying it and honest in responding to it, then they say race relations have gotten worse. When in fact, if you want to marry somebody outside your race, you want to get a house, you want to get a job, irrespective of your race, color, creed, you can do it in America to the degree that you can't do it anywhere else in the world. But what Obama did was disappoint people. Ben is absolutely right. A lot of people who did not vote for Obama still applauded the idea that a black man could become president of the United States. And what did he do with that? When the Cambridge police thing happened, that was his moment. That was his air traffic controller moment that Ronald Reagan had. He could have said to Skip Gates, his friend, "You're my friend, but you're a professor at Harvard. You're tenured. You're a role model. This is not how you deal with police." The officers came to the man's house, remember? He was coming back from vacation and had forgotten his door key. So he and the taxi driver pushed open the door, broke into his own house. And an astute neighbor saw it, called 911. Don't you want your neighbors to do that? Cop shows up, white cop, sees him in the house, asks him very politely to step out of the house and show me ID. And instead of doing it, Gates goes, "I'll come out if your mama is out there." And Obama could have taken that and informed people, here's how you deal with the police. If you are stopped by the police, be polite. Say yes, sir. Say no, sir. Hand at 10 o'clock, hand at 2 o'clock. Make sure your paperwork is in order. If you have a difficult time, get the officer's badge number and deal with it later on. That's what Obama could have said and should have said and didn't. And he did that with Trayvon Martin. He did that with Ferguson. He did it over and over and over again. And it's offensive to me.
Can I
just say one more thing?
I want to ask you to do something. Because we have a national audience, because people watch the Reagan Library events, I've been out on the road with Larry in Cleveland and Pittsburgh. I've heard this story, but I want you to hear it, and I want the larger audience to hear what race relations were like for your father. And the conversation, it takes a while to tell. We got time.
Okay.
So unbend a little bit, because that's where we were. And for young people in particular of all races, I want them to know where we were and where we are now for the benefit of the context.
Well, and it's why I have the attitude that I have. My father and I did not get along. I thought of him as a mean, ornery SOB. And my two brothers all felt the same way. We couldn't stand the SOB. When he was in the house, it tensed up the house. I was happy when he wasn't home. My dad started a cafe, and unfortunately, I had to work for him, and we didn't get along. And my dad, when I was 15 years old, was yelling at me because I had done something he thought was wrong. And I told myself, the next time he yells at me, I'm leaving. I wish I had had the cashews to say, the next time he yells at me, I'll have a mano conversation with him. But I was afraid of him. So my dad yelled at me. The waitress had called in sick that day. The restaurant was full of people. And I walked out. My dad got home. He was pissed. He paid me $10 a day plus tips. He balled up the $10, and he said, "Why did you leave?" I said, "I got tired of the way you spoke to me." He threw it at me on the bed. He walked out of my bedroom. We did not speak for 10 years. And when I say didn't speak, I mean not speak. It wasn't even, do you think it's going to rain? How about those Rams? We didn't speak for 10 years. Now I'm 25 years old, and I'm living in Ohio, and I'm beginning to have difficulty sleeping. And I think it has something to do with an unresolved issue with my father. Not that I thought we'd ever be friends, but I figured we should at least clear the air. So I called my secretary. I said, cancel all my appointments. I'm going to LA. Didn't tell my parents I was coming because I didn't want my dad to prepare for this meeting. So I go to the restaurant at 1:30. I walk in with 2 big bags. My dad said he was surprised to see me. He said, "Shall I put your bags in the back?" I said, "No, Dad, I'm only going to be here for 10 minutes. I want to talk to you." He said, "Fine, wait until we close." We closed at 2:30. So I sat there for an hour. And I said, "Larry, be calm. Don't tee off on the man. Just calmly explain to him why you hate his guts." So my dad sat down, and I was not calm. I spoke for 20 minutes nonstop. You guys know how I can go. And I talked about every whipping, every beating, every time he took a belt, everything he ever said to me, did to me that I thought was wrong, that I thought was over the top, that I thought was abusive, everything. And my dad just took it. And finally, I had run out of ammo. After 20 minutes, I was done. And my dad looked up, and he goes, "Is that it? You didn't talk to me for 10 years because of that?" And he said, "Let me tell you about my father." And this is the first time I ever heard anything about my dad. It was kind of like a no-fly zone over him. I knew he was the only child because we never had any relatives from my dad who visited us. But beyond that, I knew nothing about the man's life. And he said, "Your name, Elder, is not my biological father's name. I never met my biological father," he said. "Elder is the name of one of my mother's boyfriends, alcoholic, abusive, sort of worked. And when he did work, he gave my mother the money, and on Wednesday he wanted the money back. She wouldn't give it to him. He beat the crap out of her. This went on over and over again. My dad said this happened all the time, and when he intervened, the man would beat him. Series of boyfriends. The mother could neither read nor write. and just had a series of boyfriends, each one more irresponsible than the one before. My dad, at 13 years old, comes home from school, has a quarrel with his mom's then boyfriend. The mom sides with the boyfriend, throws my father out of the house, never to return. 13-year-old black boy, Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South at the beginning of the Great Depression. And my father took any kind of work he could get. Ultimately, he became a Pullman porter. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And he came to California and saw how sunny it was and how more friendly and less racist people seemed to be. And my dad made a mental note that maybe someday I'll relocate to California. Pearl Harbor, my dad joined the Marines. I said, why? He said, I like the uniforms and I like the fact that they go where the action goes. My dad was stationed on the island of Guam. He became a staff sergeant in charge of cooking facilities. The war is over. My dad goes to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he had met and married my mom, to get him a job as a short order cook, which is what he always wanted to do. He goes to restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, and he's told, we don't hire niggers. My dad goes to an unemployment office. The lady says you went through the wrong door. My dad goes out to the hall, sees colored only, goes through that door to the very same lady who sent him out. My dad said, this is BS. I'm going to California. He went out to California, walked around for 2 days, and every restaurant said, I'm sorry, you have no references, which is California's way of saying the same thing they said in Tennessee, except a little more genteel. My dad went to an unemployment office, one door this time. They had nothing. The lady says, what time do you open? She said 8:30. What time do you close? She said 5. My dad said, I'll be sitting there until you find something for me. My dad sat in the chair for a day and a half. Lady came up and said, I've got something for you. Don't think you're going to want it. My dad said, I'm sure I'm going to want it. What is it? She said, it's a job cleaning toilets with Nabisco bread. And my dad took that job for 10 years, took a second job cleaning toilets at a company called Barbara Ann Bread, cooked for a family on the weekends to raise a little bit more money, and went to night school 2 to 3 times a week to get his GED. The man never slept. Maybe 3.5, 4 hours a day for decades. You do that and come home, 3 rambunctious boys, and see what kind of mood you're in. So I got smaller and smaller and smaller as my dad spoke. He got bigger and bigger and bigger. So the book I wrote is called Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, about the 8-hour conversation the two of us had. And my dad always told me this, despite all the things he went through. If anybody had a reason to be angry and carry around an AK-47 and mow down the white man, it's my dad. My dad always told my brothers and me this: hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you bitch, moan, and whine about what somebody did to you, go to the nearest mirror and ask yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And the last thing he said is, no matter how good you are, how hard you try, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mom and me whether or not we raised a man. To which I would say, not too much pressure, Dad.
Point. Many points.
Last thing? Final note, my dad was a lifelong Republican. My mom was a Democrat. And my dad and my mom did agree on one thing, and that was the welfare state. My dad and my mom both felt that the welfare state was incentivizing women to marry the government and allowing men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. They both thought it was a neutron bomb dropped on the country, particularly on the black community. And right now, we've gone from 25% of black kids born outside of wedlock to 73% now. And I didn't say it, Obama said a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. That's the #1 social problem in this country.
And this leads me to the problem of race and class, because I think the 3 most important things that were written in the 2016 cycle was a book by J.D. Vance titled Hillbilly Elegy. It's about Middleton, Ohio, and it's about my hometown, basically, which is Warren, Ohio. It's a steel town that's fallen on hard times, gone down 50% in population, and where the opioid epidemic first reached its rampant stage and it sort of destroyed the white underclass. Ross Douthat's column, The Democrats Have a Samantha Bee Problem, which talks about the cultural imperialism of the left on late-night television. Not only do they disagree with the positions represented here and probably mostly in the room, but they have contempt for us, genuine contempt. And then Peggy Noonan's piece, and she won the Pulitzer this year, and I think a lot of it had to do with this piece that came out in February of 2016 on the protected versus the unprotected. And in America, you have certain amounts of social capital that prevent you from being overwhelmed by adverse circumstances. As Larry's father told him, you'll get knocked down on your butt. Will you get up? And usually a lot of that has to do with whether or not someone will help you get up. And the underclass in America, overwhelmingly as a percentage white, though perhaps disproportionately black, but in pure numbers white, feels left behind. And so my friend Selena Zito, do you know Selena, by the way?
Yep. Yeah.
Selena is a weekly guest on my radio show now. She's doing a drive through Trump country. And Warren, Ohio, which last voted for a Republican in 1972 with Richard Nixon, before that in 1928, voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. She was in Ashtabula, where all 4 of my grandparents were born, lived, and died and are buried. Ashtabula has never voted for a Republican. Ashtabula County voted for Donald Trump. She is on her way across the lake to Michigan and on up to Wisconsin. She began in Pittsburgh. This is Trump country. And the tribe of the underclass of Anglos is a new tribe in America. They used to be defined by their union card. I grew up in a union town, GM town, and a steelworker town. And they were not defined by race, though there were racial problems. They were defined by blue collar versus white collar. And Ben, I think that's changed. I think it's very bad, and I don't know how we change it back.
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that I think is really devastating about the tribalism that Obama drove us to, is that by breaking people down by race, white blue-collar people in this election cycle voted in excess of 70% for Donald Trump. More white blue-collar people voted for Donald Trump by percentage than Hispanics voted for Hillary Clinton.
That's really remarkable. Say that again. That's remarkable.
More white blue-collar people voted for Donald Trump by percentage than Hispanics voted for Hillary Clinton in this last election cycle, which means that they are a voter bloc now. Right? That's the way that people generally define a voter bloc is if there's a consistent vote that's above 65, 70% from a particular racial group. It's why people see black folks or Jews as a voter bloc, because they're consistently voting that way. Obama polarized the country so much that there was a feeling that Trump at least is not spitting on me. Right? He doesn't think I'm a bad guy. He doesn't think I'm a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. I think a lot of this was cultural, but and I think that that's not a wrong reaction. I think it's fine to vote for a politician who's not calling you dirt all the time. But I think that the part where I think we have a problem, and this is why I agree with Larry that the biggest problem in the country and with Hugh is the breaking down of the social fabric that's taken place over the course of decades, is that now we almost have a battle between a Democratic Party that says to particular voter groups, I will give you things and I will be your hand up as the government, and a government from Republicans that is saying the same thing but to a different voter group. I thought the bravest thing in this election cycle was Ted Cruz winning Iowa while telling people that he would provide no ethanol subsidies to the people in Iowa. That was a brave thing to do. It was a politically, for all the problems that people have with Cruz, that was a brave thing for him to do in Iowa, because the easiest thing in politics to do, there are 2 simultaneous promises that people make, and they can't both hold true. One is I won't lie for you, and second is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Right, and what I'm seeing now is this feeling, I'll take the tariff issue as an example, this feeling like, well, Trump is here to help me. The government is not there to help you. Your community is there to help you. Your family is there to help you. And if we don't have family and community, we damn well better build that social structure, or government is going to fill that gap. Because when you read Hillbilly Elegy, which is a great book, as Hugh says, when you read that, people are going to have 2 responses. One will be, well, it's a good thing that J.D. Vance actually had his grandparents around who provided the social structure that picked him up, and it's a great thing that Larry had his father around and his mother around to help pick him up. Or people say, well, I wish the government were there to help pick these people up. And so if we don't rebuild the social structure ourselves, then it's going to be government that fills that gap. And Donald Trump cannot help these people. Okay? The idea that Donald Trump is going to bring back all of the jobs in Ashtabula, that Donald Trump is going to bring back all of these manufacturing jobs that have been lost through tariffs, it's just economically illiterate. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to folks, but 85% of the manufacturing jobs lost in the United States have been lost to technology, not to trade. And the reason you have a nice iPhone in your pocket as opposed to the crappy Samsung flip phone you had 12 years ago is because of free trade. So comparative advantage still applies.
This is not racial. If in fact he reduces the individual income tax rate for people filing as a subchapter S corporation to 15%, this country will have the biggest deficit it's ever had, but it will have a remarkable explosion of wealth.
That's exactly right.
It will be a supercharged boom.
He needs to take the regulation off and make us more competitive, not try to protect industries that have not been competitive for years, because that's not the way, that is a redistributionist program.
So if I can tell you the best thing, I want to do best and worst and go back to the 100 days, best and worst moments. after, and I'll come back to that, but after we focus one more round on the first 100 days and tribalism. It feels to me, I saw a movie last night, The Lost City of Z. And The Lost City of Z has within it a fairly vivid portrayal of a period of time of trench warfare in World War I. And boy, am I glad I never was in the trenches of World War I. I know many of you are veterans of war. By the way, would the men and women who wore the uniform please stand up so we can thank you? John mentioned that earlier, but thank you for doing so. Okay, it looked to me to be more Vietnam-era veterans than Gulf War-era veterans, but none of us did World War I, and politics has become World War I. It's like every day, in every column, in every minute of every broadcast, in every panel on every network, people are arguing and exploding. And I don't think that's good. Larry, do you think it's good?
I think it's healthy. I think we're having disagreements, and we're not killing each other over the disagreements. We're having disagreements. And half this country believes that there's a free lunch and that these bastards over there are stopping them from eating it. And we need to do something about that.
See, Larry, here's where I disagree. I think 80% of the country believes that the bastards over there are stealing their lunch. This is my problem, and this is why I'm fearful for the future of the country, is because I think that I used to believe that that was true, that my side of the aisle, we were the people of small government and limited government, and give me my freedom and let me do what I will with it. And what I'm seeing is that there's an enormous number of people on our side who still, and this is what the polls show, that people are shifting in the direction of big government from the right now because they trust Trump more than they trust Obama. Well, it doesn't matter who's in office. I mean, the government is not there to help you. This is the difference between Reagan and Trump. And when people compare the two, they are not comparable on this level. Okay, and this is the biggest problem that I have. And when you talk about tribalism, the idea that truth depends on which side you are on is a deeply troublesome one. We cannot have conversations if we refuse to acknowledge basically true facts on both sides. And of course, the left has been tribal for a long time, but the right's reaction to the tribalism is to defend every stupid thing that gets said by anybody on the right. And you see this in terms of the heroes that we pick. I mean, there are people who I think are just despicable, who have been hailed as heroes on the right, at least until they blow themselves up, and that's only because the left hates them. It's not because they know anything about the Constitution or conservatism or limited government. It's the left hates you, you must be on my side. That's not the way.
But when you say that I think we'll all stipulate that Neil Gorsuch is the best thing that happened in the first 100 days.
100%.
100%. Neil Gorsuch also demonstrated that you win with brains and temperament. That was the hearings were a triumph, not only the confirmation and the use of the Reed rule, but the hearings were a triumph because here was this brilliant man who maintained his demeanor in a savage assault of idiocy. I mean, it was almost, as a con law professor, it was embarrassing to me, and I won't name any of the particular senators, the way they would frame questions. I have to go and unteach what they said to my students the next day for fear that they took sitting senators' views of the Constitution.
He's talking about Al Franken, guys.
Well, among many, among many. And so I thought the fact that he won through intellect and temperament was very, very positive. But on the other side, this is not tribal. The best thing he's done after Gorsuch is Scott Pruitt. Now, Scott Pruitt's my friend, so discount this. Attorney General of Oklahoma, owned a baseball team, man of deep religious faith, married for a long time, 2 great kids, adamant that the government has got to be carved back to the, as he said, the incrementalism at the EPA has got to be replaced by EPA originalism. It was put in place to clean up the water, clean up the air, and to assure that we did not do terrible things, not to control the use of your land. And it's become a land use controlling process. So I think that in the Reagan party, at the Reagan Library, there beats, and in the heart of Donald Trump, a developer, there beats a deep desire for freedom from government control of your stuff. That's not tribal.
Well, I would say that it's clearly true with Gorsuch and with Pruitt, obviously. As far as what beats in his heart, government not being in control of your stuff, again, he doesn't want to slash entitlements. Again, he's now pushing a $1 trillion infrastructure package. So I wish that listen, I hope I hope you're right. I hope that beat resonates deeper in him. I hope it beats throughout his entire body. But I'm going to reserve judgment before I hand him the compliment of saying that I think that's actually what's beating there until I see how things play out. I mean, the way that he handled Trump care, I thought was disastrous.
I know you both know Stephen Moore, the economist who used to be with the Heritage, with the Wall Street Journal. He is one of Trump's advisors. And I had Stephen Moore on the show a few weeks ago, Ben, and I asked him those questions about this ridiculous infrastructure investment, which you and I used to call pork.
Exactly.
When Obama called it stimulus, we called it pork. Now that it's called an infrastructure investment, the same people that called Obama's stimulus pork no longer call it pork.
Right, don't you understand? It'll create jobs now, right? Yeah.
And his protectionism. I talked to Stephen Moore about that, and he is on the same page with you and me and is advising Trump accordingly. So we'll see what kind of advice he takes.
Exactly.
But the bottom line is to get the government less intrusive and to put more money in the pockets of people, which is what Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan gave us a 4% GDP. Obama's given us a 2% GDP. The average GDP following a recession is 3%. The difference between a 2% and a 3% GDP is 1 million jobs each year times the length of the recovery. So if Obama had just stayed on the basketball court and practiced his jump shot, we'd have 7 million more jobs than we have today. So Obama called his foreign policy, don't do stupid blank, starts with an S. How about Donald Trump has not done stupid stuff in the first 100 days? It seems to me, I know you think that's a low bar, but this is where the country is. The country is drifting to the left, partially because of Hollywood, partially because of media, partially because of academia, and more people are receptive to a bigger government than ever before. It's an argument that we as Republicans need to fight and deal with. For example, this repeal and replace thing. The problem is that we Republicans bought into the idea that Obamacare needed to be repealed and, quote, replaced with something better, close quote, which is what Trump said over and over and over again. What the hell does that even mean? A top-down solution replaced by a kinder, gentler top-down solution is still a top-down solution. Anybody see the movie Hacksaw Ridge?
Yep.
See, here's the problem. There are so many impediments in our healthcare system that make everything more expensive, starting at the top with the doctors. There is an artificially low supply of doctors. We have the same number of doctors per capita than we've had 30 years ago because the AMA, along with regulators, state and federal, have colluded to suppress the supply of doctors to keep their income up. Milton Friedman said that the AMA is perhaps the strongest trade union in the history of this country and serves as a medieval guild to put up barriers to entry to keep the incomes up. I mentioned Hacksaw Ridge because Private Doss was a conscientious objector, the first one to win the Medal of Valor. Even though he refused to touch a rifle, he wanted to be a battlefield medic. They trained him to do that. So he goes to Okinawa, saves 75 men because he's trained to deal with trauma, battlefield wounds, gunshots. If Private Doss, after the war is over, decided to come back to Warren, Ohio, put out a shingle, I'm Private Doss. I can deal with broken bones, trauma, gunshot wounds. They'd haul him off to jail. So he's good enough to deal with the trauma for the men and women on the battlefield, but not good enough to deal with the trauma for the men and women who are civilians that the men and women on the battlefield are protecting. There's something bizarre about that. And when I mentioned this on the air, I got a phone call from someone who works on a military base, a dental hygienist. He says, I'm trained, Larry, to clean teeth on the military. If I left the base and I tried to clean civilian teeth, I'd be breaking the law, I'd go to jail. Does this make any sense? And these are the kinds of things that are up and down our healthcare system, and that is why things are so expensive. So Republicans for the last 8 years should have been putting on public service announcements, PSAs, news bulletins, informing people of these kinds of things, educating people about what's going on with our healthcare system, why things are more expensive, how much cheaper they'd be if we drop some of these barriers to entry. And therefore, the American people would not be expecting Obamacare to be replaced, quote, with something better, unless that something better is free markets.
You know, I want to jump in here. Ben used to work with Steve Bannon, who I believe has been unfairly impugned on the evidence that has been put before the American people thus far, largely because he hasn't said anything.
You mean with regard to anti-Semitism and racism? And
yeah.
Yeah, he's not an anti-Semite. He's not a racist.
He hasn't said anything.
He's a jackass, but he's neither of the other.
Okay. And so I don't know him. I've never met him.
I was on the phone with him 2 hours a day for 2 years.
So I've only talked to him for 3 minutes, but on the basis of this, the one thing that he said, that he's at war with the administrative state,
That was good. Yeah.
is so important for us to understand that if we don't take freedom seriously, it will be taken from us incrementally. And I want to now turn to foreign policy, because to me, the most successful thing that has happened is the sea change represented by 59 cruise missiles. The president did not ask anyone's permission. He solicited from Secretary, formerly General Mattis, a series of options, consulted with H.R. McMaster, used the one that was least interventionist and most powerfully delivering of a message that we are signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and this is a sarin gas, and that we will not let it happen. The drop of the Moab on Afghanistan signaled to everyone that we will use terms of engagement that are appropriate to the field of battle that we are on, and we are not going to worry about anyone except our troops first, minimizing civilian casualties always, and then the dispatch of an armada that includes the USS Michigan, sadly named for the most incompetent state in the Union. But nevertheless, there, with 155 Tomahawk missiles, with the Vincent, with the Reagan, and we are headed, according to Admiral Stavridis, to a point where the militarization of nuclear weapons by North Korea and their expansion of their ballistic missile capacity will take us to the point that they can threaten the United States, and we can't allow that. We've had Benjamin Netanyahu back to the White House and not left sitting in the basement. We've had President Sisi at the White House reestablishing a relationship with Sunni Islam and King Abdullah. And the sea change, America is leading, and I think this isn't tribal. I think this is actually resonating with everyone else. I'll start with you, Ben, since I've been just talking with Larry about race. What do you make of the sea change in America's posture towards the world?
So I agree with you, obviously, that Trump's muscular approach to foreign policy is a massive sea change from the surrender first policy of President Obama and the slash the military first policy of President Obama. And that is wonderful. And all the things that you just mentioned, I think, are tremendous. I'm glad that he's now taking the advice of, I mean, you mentioned Bannon, but I'm glad he's taking the advice not of Steve Bannon on foreign policy, but of McMaster and Mattis on foreign policy, apparently. I think that's a really good thing. The question about Trump, and I keep leaving these in terms of open questions because it's just too soon. We're 100 days in. So, yes, I was happy too when he fired 59 cruise missiles at an airbase in Syria. But the question is, and this is a real question, was it because he saw something on Fox and Friends and Ivanka called him up and said, do you see the dead kids on Fox and Friends? And he said, bring me a list of options. And then the option was, okay, what won't get me in trouble, but it'll make me look muscular, and it's fire a bunch of missiles at a camel's ass in Syria? Or is this part of a broader plan? Because, and I think that has to be taken into account, because remember, a week ago, he apparently called the Turkish dictator, Erdogan, and congratulated him on the death of democracy in Turkey. So what this says to me is that not that he's a bad guy, not that he is going to pick all the wrong things, but that there is, again, and this is endemic to Trump, there is no solid worldview that is driving him, so you just hope that the right people get in his ear. And so right now, I think that it looks like some of the right people are in his ear, although Ivanka was talking about taking in more Syrian refugees today, and that's always the balance. Does he have a worldview beyond just, if somebody bothers me, then I'll fire a missile at them? Does it, that involves, it takes a little bit more knowledge of foreign policy than that. That's a good start. It is a good start, and it's better than Obama. We didn't even have that start, right? That's better. But it does require a proactive American foreign policy in order to maintain our dominance in the world. And when he says that he shifted his opinion on China because he had a 10-minute conversation with the premier of China and North Korea, like you would hope that he had advisors who are telling him more than that. So here's my view of, again, going back to my original view, and this is true of everything in the Trump administration. He appoints really good people. When he lets those people do their job and takes their advice, everything is hunky-dory. When he feels that he needs to get personally involved and take control of the steering wheel, then if you're in an oncoming lane, watch out. Because I just don't know.
Well, I think you said it's too soon to assess him on foreign policy. I think it's too soon to make statements like that about what he's going to do in a given situation. It's still too early.
I'm not really making a claim about what he's going to do. I'm saying I have no clue what he's going to do.
The world's a messy, sloppy place, and oftentimes presidents are responding to things that they didn't anticipate. George W. Bush, of course, didn't anticipate 9/11. And so Donald Trump has inherited a very sloppy, messy world that's been sloppier and messier because of what Barack Obama did. We need to remember something. Obama came into office, campaigned against the Iraq War, called it a dumb war, and said he's going to get all the troops out, and did. Over the objection of his Secretary of Defense, over the objection of the CIA head, over the objection of the Secretary of State, Hillary, over the objection of the Joint Chiefs, over the objection of the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. He pulled him out anyway. And Ray Odierno, the retiring Army general of the Joint Chiefs, said, had there been a stay-behind force, we could have dealt with ISIS. So we're replacing that commander-in-chief with a commander-in-chief who will say radical Islam and whose Secretary of Defense is called Mad Dog. So there's a new sheriff in town. The Middle East is a sloppy, messy place. I think that when Barack Obama made the red line, didn't do anything about it, it undermined our credibility in the world. And if nothing else, the world is now on notice that this is a person that is serious about doing something about a dictator like North Korea, where they are every now and then threatening to launch missiles against us. We give them all sorts of goodies. Donald Trump thinks this is insane, and so do I. Just as Ronald Reagan thought mutually assured destruction was insane. And so you're having somebody come in with an entirely different perspective. Why do we have to put up with this? And there's something that we can do about this. That's Donald Trump's attitude, and I think it's very refreshing.
This is, in my view, the biggest, best change in direction since Reagan took over for Carter. Other changes have been incremental and significant, but I mean it is a sea change, represented today by the approach of an Iranian warship to an American destroyer, which upon completion of the 5 warning whistles fired the warning flare, which would have been followed by a projectile. James Mattis is not going to put up with this, and I believe that President Trump is listening to him. Now, we have 21 minutes. I want to talk about politics because something Ben said does alarm me. If the Democrats win the House, they will impeach Donald Trump. This is without question in my mind. They have set it up with the emoluments clause and with a continuing, you live on the right. You're here, so you're living in the world that we create every day. There's a different world that's created every day on the left in which they talk all day about Michael Flynn, who hasn't been in the government for 3 months. They talk all day about Carter Page.
Carter Page, yeah.
Carter Page.
Carter Page.
They talk all day long about people that I don't care about.
Paul Manafort, yeah.
Paul Manafort, because they are setting up articles of impeachment if the Republicans lose the House. And I'm glad this is on tape because it's in my book. It's as clear to me as the hand in front of my face that they intend to impeach him, which means that the Republicans have to hold the House or we'll have paralysis followed by social disorder of an extraordinary sort, because the Trump tribe ain't going to go easy into the night. The Trump tribe doesn't actually like me very much. It hates Ben, and they're suspicious of Larry. And so that's where we are with the Trump tribe. And the Trump tribe is out there, and they are vigorous, and they will not go gently into the night. So if this happens, it ain't going to be 73, 74. It's not going to be 96, 97. It's going to be fighting in the street if there's an impeachment. So how do the Republicans, this is a bigger question, start with you, Larry. The Freedom Caucus, God love half of it is the Area 51 caucus that believes in legislative flying saucers that can bring down new rules of the Senate and replace Susan Collins in Maine. The Senate is not as conservative as the House, and the House refuses to deal with that. What do the Republicans do to save themselves from what could be a wipeout? And one more thing, John Boehner sat in my radio studio in California in 2006 and swore that the Republicans could not lose the House because of redistricting. He swore to me, he was the majority leader, not the speaker at the time, Denny Hastert was the speaker, said, Hugh, we can't lose. The districts are drawn so that we cannot lose. We not only lost, we lost big. Mm-hmm. And because people are used to that. What do the Republicans have to do?
Simple, succeed. It's still the economy stupid. If Donald Trump succeeds in getting us a 4% GDP, all these things will be moot. Nobody's going to care. They have to succeed. If he gets the taxes down, continues this march towards deregulation, and as long as people are confident to save and invest, we're going to be just fine. So I don't fear that there's going to be
Should they repeal Obamacare?
Look, I said already that the Republicans should have had an 8-year conversation with America about what should be done about our healthcare system. We need to have less government, not more of it. And so I wouldn't be talking about, Obamacare should be repealed, certainly, but I wouldn't be talking about replacing it. I'd be letting the American people know how much more money we're spending, how much more money we're paying because of this system with all these barriers to entry that are in our system.
But if I can press you, the Republican Senate won't do that. There are 52 Republicans. You lose 3 immediately if you even scale back Medicaid 10%. You might be able to devolve it and cap it, but all you can get is incremental change. Should they take that incremental change, or should they let it? It is in a death spiral. I don't care what PolitiFact says about me. They fact-checked me and said I'm false. It is in a death spiral because of reimbursements and a bunch of premium increases and deductibles. Should they take incremental reform, or should they let it collapse?
You know, the Freedom Caucus, I heard today, has now signed on to some sort of new repeal and replacement bill.
The MacArthur Amendment.
Yeah, that's supposed to be a little more free market oriented.
It's federalism oriented. It lets states choose.
Yeah. I think they need to do something, because it looks as if a lot of people voted for Donald Trump because they assumed Obamacare was going to be repealed and replaced, and if they don't do it, he may lose 10 to 15% of his support because they feel he didn't realize one of his campaign promises. But he ought to explain why it didn't happen. It didn't happen because a lot of Republicans kind of believe in free markets and therefore feel that any of this kind of top-down stuff is a bad idea. So as far as I'm concerned, if Donald Trump explains that this thing is on a death spiral, even if Hillary had become president, we'd still be facing all these crises. He'll be able to survive the fact that Obamacare hasn't been repealed and replaced.
That's interesting.
But the main thing that needs to happen is the economy has to continue to do well. The economy does well. He rose to a 49 one-state victory like Ronald Reagan did in '84.
So I generally agree with the idea that tax reform should have been approached first. I understand all the procedural reasons why they started with health care reform, because they thought, okay, well, we'll save $1 trillion here and then we'll apply it to the taxes through reconciliation. I get all of that, but it is much more difficult, as you're pointing out correctly, to do a solid repeal of Obamacare that satisfies people who actually want to see Obamacare repealed and doesn't hurt people politically. You know, so if repeal of Obamacare is on the table, what they really should have done, and this is the biggest problem that you mentioned before, Trump's biggest victory. I think the biggest problem that Trump has had is on Trump Care, and the reason that he's had the biggest problem on Trump Care is because he made an unsustainable promise to people, which is the same promise Barack Obama made, basically, which is you're going to be able to keep your insurance if things change, and that's not true. Okay, so the fact is that when you say pre-existing conditions, the bottom line is that Barack Obama, the key promise that everybody likes is the one that destroys the healthcare system, that insurance companies are going to be forced to cover pre-existing conditions. That makes it not an insurance company by definition. There's no such thing as a fire insurance company that covers pre-existing conditions, a life insurance company that covers pre-existing conditions, or a disability insurance company that covers pre-existing conditions, because that's idiotic.
But that's Area 51 politics. The Senate will not vote for that.
So, okay, so I don't want to call it Area 51 politics because I don't think it's delusional that that's correct. I'm saying to you that as far as...
Well, there might be something in Area 51, but we're not going to know.
No, but okay. But the reason I'm not saying Area 51 politics is because in this particular case, there are aliens in Area 51. You're just saying it's irrelevant because we can't get there.
Right.
So that's not actually Area 51 politics. So to argue with the term, but the point that I'm making is that if you are right, they can't get there, then start with the thing that's going to be popular and that is going to get the economy going, and then worry about the rest of this later. And he'll have some political capital to play with.
Isn't this what Ryan's doing? They're talking about reviving healthcare, but they're really moving to tax care.
Well, I mean, I hope that's what Ryan is doing. I hope that's what Ryan is doing. I think that, again, part of the problem is because Trump was pitching the expansion of Medicaid and for part of the campaign, because he was pitching the idea that, I mean, at the beginning of the campaign, he was saying the Canadian healthcare system was good, right? And so when you do that, and then you go to Congress, Paul Ryan, who deserves an enormous amount of blame for Trump Care, and Trump, who also deserves an enormous amount of blame for Trump Care, Trump had no butt. So Trump put 17 days of work into this thing because he doesn't know what's in it. I mean, let's be real. Half Congress doesn't know what it is, and Trump clearly didn't know what was in it, because he was saying things about it that weren't true while it was being pushed out. So Paul Ryan basically said, what do I think I can get done here? Okay, here's a bill, right? I think I can get it done.
I disagree. I think there's a legislative rest stop here where they could actually repeal the medical device tax, repeal the Cadillac tax, devolve Medicaid. This is so important
they should do these
to
things
devolve
piece by piece.
Medicaid.
They should do these things piece by piece. They should not do them as an omnibus package.
But you can only do them with 51 votes through the reconciliation, which expires in May. So they've got to do something soon.
I understand that they want to do something soon, and I get all of that. But I'm saying do it piecemeal. If you're not going to do the whole thing, do it piecemeal. If you want to do the whole thing, then all you had to do to get the Senate on board, because they all made the promise they were going to repeal Obamacare, is just put a bill that says we're going to repeal Obamacare, but they don't want the fallout. And this is the cowardice of Republicans, and this has lasted for my entire lifetime.
What this shows is the tremendous victory that Obama won when he got Obamacare done.
Yeah.
Yes.
I said that on the air.
Yeah.
I said this is huge.
You know why?
It's going to be very
You know why?
difficult to
Because
undo it.
Republicans buy into the basic, it's what you're saying. Republicans buy into the basic concept that the government should be involved in healthcare, and they are scared bleepless that the minute that they say anything different, they're going to get walloped at the polls. I mean, look at the government shutdown as an example of this. So they're afraid, maybe rightly, that a government shutdown is going to hurt them at the polls. You're the party of small government, and you're being blackmailed with they're going to shut down the government.
They should have embraced that, because you can control it.
It's
you
insane.
can control it.
Right? I mean, Barack Obama supposedly won the argument on the government shutdown because the Republicans were so crazy they were going to shut down the government. And even Barack Obama couldn't come up with horror stories bad enough, so he had to shut open-air memorials.
Yep.
Right? Donald Trump.
And we won the 2014. We won the election
in 2014.
Yeah.
Trump
All right.
said, shut it down, fine. You want to do this over the wall? The wall, like, you really want to keep the border open. You're going to shut down the government to keep the border open?
Ben is
What's wrong with
100%
you
right.
people?
I can't believe they walked away from that fight. We have
unbelievable.
12 minutes, and so I want to close with this. I want audience participation. If you want the president to continue to tweet at least the rate and style that he is currently tweeting, would you please stand up? All right, if you want the president to tweet significantly less, would you please stand up? All right, let me tell you the difference that I find genuinely stunning. Larry and I this is the fourth one we've done together. We did it in Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. And in Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, there were overwhelming majorities for more of the same. They wanted more tweeting.
They agreed
in
with
California, they want less tweeting. Why do you two disagree on this? And what do you want him to do? This is specific. Let's assume President Trump is watching because he's really bored right now. And he doesn't like Bill O'Reilly's off of Fox.
There's at least a 70% shot.
There's at least, we're talking about him. It's streaming live from the Reagan Library. I hope you people, by the way, I want you to tweet, Hugh is better than Ben and Larry. That's the hashtag tonight. Hashtag Hugh is better than Ben and Larry. What's your advice to President Trump about communication? You have the floor, Mr. Shapiro.
I think that a lot of the people who are eager about his tweets are excited because there's someone who's slapping the media, and that is good, but it is also reactionary. And assuming that he is going to win with the same base that he brought into 2016 is an enormous mistake. He's actually going to have to push policy, and it is an obstacle. It is not just indifference. It is a blown opportunity for him to have a Republican House, a Republican Senate. We have no major pieces of legislation. I know that you and I disagree about the CRAs, but these are not historic pieces of legislation. Okay, it's in Obamacare, it isn't the stimulus package, it isn't the Lilly Ledbetter Act even.
We disagree.
Okay? But the bottom line is that all of the energy that he has right now should be in promoting a vision of America. That's what the first 100 days are for. The first 100 days, if they matter at all, which is debatable, if they really matter, Ronald Reagan didn't pass a major bill in his first 100 days in office, but he spent 100 days pushing a vision of a smaller government that could be achieved through tax reform. And he did that for 3 months, and he beat the living hell out of Democrats with that night after night. And that was effective because he was on message. Donald Trump's Twitter feed, it has the occasional gem that I laugh at and that you laugh at and that's amusing and that trolls Democrats and they all go crazy for a day. It is not a victory just because the media goes crazy for a day if you can't capitalize on the victory. If you're distracting from something, then by God, do something while they're distracted. And so the idea that you're going to spend all your time on Twitter tweeting these things, I think that a lot of the people in the middle of the country who like this stuff like it for the same reason they liked him. They felt that there are a bunch of people on the left who disdain them and hate them, and he is speaking out for them. And I don't think that Trump has to stop creating that feel. But I think he can do that without creating 3-month firestorms for himself over wiretapping that are completely useless and, in fact, counterproductive.
I put this issue in the same category as I put Donald Trump's taxes. Who cares? He's president right now. If Donald Trump succeeds one more time in giving us a 4% GDP growth, nobody's going to care about his tweets. I would submit that most people in the country can't even name what he tweeted 2 weeks ago. It's something that people in the media look at and jump on and talk about and dissect, but normal people care about their jobs. Normal people care about the economy. And if Donald Trump gives us the 4% GDP, tweet on.
Right. Last observation. I'll give you a second for last thing. The smartest thing I've heard, my friend Chuck Todd is a Sunday morning friend now, and he said something the weekend after the election when I was together with him doing Meet the Press, that every time pollsters use the term non-college educated voters. People who are non-college educated voters here, we think you're stupid. And I believe that Donald Trump has tapped into class in a way that American politics, Democrats have tried to do class politics before. It inevitably becomes racial politics. He's tapped into class. I think he ought to be doing more press conferences all the time. I think he is a much more effective communicator when he's talking to the media than when he's tweeting. I thought his hour and 40-minute press conference was genius. And I go back to the campaign, the thing that we did not appreciate, I did not appreciate, I won't speak for you guys, I did not appreciate that when he's on the screen, people are watching him and not something else. And that he eats up all the time in the way that every television series that's ever been successful has blown out the competition. And so my closing comment is, I want more of him on matters of substance. I want him to talk about North Korea, I want him to be briefed, and then to come out and talk about North Koreans and say, we will take care of this problem. I think that's so effective when he does that. And so my request, and the only thing I've got, is that he ought to talk about health care. It's going to die, folks. And the way he talks, by the way, is the way a lot of America talks. And I understand him completely. And the media makes fun of him. In fact, I'll give you an example. Ali Velshi is a smart guy, a good reporter, colleague of mine at NBC. Yesterday, the president gave a one quick answer to the wall, and he said, and it will cut down on human trafficking, which is the worst it's ever been in the history of the world. Ali came on and said, I guess that's true if you don't count slavery. That was snarky, because human trafficking and slavery are different things. And every American knows what he was talking about. And the media Ali went to purposefully attempt to diminish the president's grasp of the issue, when in fact the president was talking about something completely different, which is sex trafficking of young child across the border, which is real and going on. And by the way, border crossings are down, illegal border crossings are down 70% on the strength of rhetoric. So I think he should do more of this. And I want to give you guys each the last 2 minutes of the program. I want more and faster, and I want more appointments, and I want judges in a hurry, because we're running out of time. You're right, you don't get a window. Ben, and then Larry, you get the closes.
Determining whether he's been a success or a failure depends on your frame of reference. And I think that's what is really separating Larry from me on this, is that if your frame of reference is better than Hillary, if we're still going to be in election mode, and Hillary is still a character in this play, which she's not, okay? She was pushed off stage, thank God, months ago. You know, he doused her with a bucket of water and she melted, and that was it. But now that she's no longer a character, I'm gauging him against the opportunity that he's been given. He's been given an opportunity that I have not seen a Republican president really have in my lifetime, where he has this House majority and the Senate majority and the presidency. I mean, the last time the Republicans did this, they absolutely blew it under Bush. And he's got it again for God smiled upon us, and we finally have this opportunity. And I don't want to see my fears realized, okay? I want to see all my fears put to bed. I want to see that I'm wrong about this, as wrong as I was about the election. I want him to be incredibly successful, and I'm not going to gauge that success against what Hillary would have been or should have been or could have been, because, again, I'm not looking to, if you think that the baseline of good is better than Hillary Clinton, then we don't have a lot to talk about, because you're already talking, if things just stay as bad as they would have been under Barack Obama, if they just continue as they're going, we are going to go off the cliff. Okay, the entitlement crisis alone is going to drive us off the cliff.
Unfunded mandates, unfunded pension liabilities alone in California.
So the idea that if we just kind of keep driving the car and at least he's not Hillary and at least he's not that, I agree, at least he's not all of those things. But the car is still heading toward the cliff. So we need to put this sucker in reverse. And that requires him to become something that he's not, or to delegate. And so either he needs to do what you're suggesting, which is what we were all calling for him to do during the campaign, but he didn't, and so I don't think it's going to happen now, become this sort of powerful, focused spokesperson for conservative policies. If he's not going to do that, at the very least, do what Rick Perry suggested he was going to do as president, become insignificant in our lives, meaning you go in the back room, go golfing, let Scott Pruitt do his job, let A.G. Sessions do his job, let Mattis do his job.
He is doing that, sort of.
Well, the sort of is the problem. Because if he were doing that full time, then I think that we would be in a lot better shape.
But he is letting Sessions, and he's not appointing people, but Sessions is doing Sessions stuff.
I agree that Sessions is doing Sessions stuff, and I agree Pruitt's doing Pruitt stuff, and all that stuff is the good stuff. Let him, now we need to actually get to the point where we're not talking about executive government, which, by the way, is something that conservatives have embraced in a way that I don't think is good. This idea that we're all just going to govern from the executive branch now, because the legislature is just a vestigial organ of government.
That's why the CRA matters. That's not,
I don't disagree about the CRA mattering. We disagree on the degree of it mattering. I want to see some congressional leadership, and that the president either needs to step back and let Congress do its job, let Ryan and McConnell hash it out, or if he's going to take a leadership role, he needs to use the bully pulpit in a focused way. But he needs to stop being distractible, or he needs to get out of the way. If he continues to be distractible, as much as you dislike when the reporter says that about slavery. The fact is that, as you say, half the country is not living in the same narrative that we are.
You're right.
Where we say, or as Larry says, if there's 4% growth, they're not going to follow the tweets. No, they absolutely will. And I can tell you the reason, because we were all following Obama's tweets and trolling while the rest of the country was paying attention to the stock market. And now we're doing the same thing. The exact same metric that we said was a BS metric for economic success for 8 years of Obama, we are now touting as the ultimate metric of Trump's success when it's Trump. Because the polarity has just reversed. There are two separate narratives that are being built. And if we ignore the narrative in the other bubble, they're ignoring our narrative, which is great because it means they're going to lose all our votes. But if we ignore the narrative that's happening in the other bubble and don't actually promote success and instead focus on, okay, let them say it's distracting stuff, whatever, then we are going to get a whooping that we're not going to see coming.
But 4% GDP is not following the market indice. It's a completely different thing. 4% GDP is...
Of course, that's true. But I mean, everybody says, let's put it this way. When he achieves 4% GDP growth, then we can talk about how little any of this mattered. But it's a little harder to do it than it is to say it.
You get the last word tonight, Dr. Arnn. Dr. Elder.
I think, Ben, you're being really hard on Republicans, harder than you ought to be on them. It isn't that Republicans are buying everything that Donald Trump is selling. I know that he's not a fiscal conservative. I know he's not a social conservative. He is a populist, and I said so. He's got a collection of views that I disagree with. Most of his views I agree with, and some of them I vehemently disagree with. And the ones where I vehemently disagree with, I'm going to say so because I want him to be successful. I want us to have a 4% GDP growth. And if you're talking about a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, it's going to jack up the debt and, in my opinion, not do anything to the economy. It is a mistake, and Donald Trump should be warned against it and warned off of it. And that's what I hope to do. But I think that as long as we get the taxes down, continue deregulation, do something about the borders, make sure that the next Supreme Court justice is another Neil Gorsuch, and the next one after that another Neil Gorsuch, we're going to be just fine.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. One more thing. I want to thank again. Please just bear with me for a second. I want to thank mypillow.com. Use promo code Hugh. I want to thank Sonny. And Sonny Sardo, if you need business, have him done. I want to thank LAX Firing Range and LAX Ammo. And you know who you are. You know what you need. And then I want you to know that RP is going to be over here for Larry's cruise, which I should have been doing. God bless you and good night.